Hey folks, welcome to Roll of Law. So, 4 popular and powerful cards were recently banned from the Commander format for Magic the Gathering, and I've had a few emails asking, can we sue? Now, my initial thought was, obviously not, but I thought I'd do a little bit more digging and a little bit more sort of analysis, and my answer is still no, but I am doing a video to explain why I could be wrong. So let's back this up a little bit here. Magic the Gathering, if you're not familiar with it, is a collector card game, which means that they sell sort of packages of cards which are randomized. Some of these cards are more rare than others. Some of these cards as well are more useful and more valuable than others. So these cards are then used to play a game, and one of the more popular formats for the game is called Commander. Now, Commander has its own rules, and recently some of these cards that are useful in Commander or possibly elsewhere, but were banned from the Commander format. Now, these cards, and I'm just checking my notes here, we've got Dockside Extortionist, Jeweled Lotus, Mana Crypt, and Nadu Winged Wisdom. Each of these cards were banned, and some of those were expected, and some of them were less expected. And the issue, of course, is that this is leaving people with cards that may now have far less utility, and because they have far less utility, it may be far less value. As an example, one of these cards is the Jeweled Lotus. This is, of course, a reference to a very famous Magic card, the Black Lotus. However, the Jeweled Lotus is similar but less useful. And the reason why it's less useful is because you can sacrifice it, you can get rid of it for 3 mana, but it can only be used to summon your commander, and your commander only exists if you're playing the Commander format. So given that the Jeweled Lotus has now been banned from the Commander format, it is now a card that really has no use. There are some other formats where you can play it, but if you play a card, it just doesn't work there. The only thing you could do is get mana that ends up not being usable for anything other than possibly to hurt you. So this card went from a really useful card in this one specific format to having no use anywhere. This has made a lot of people very upset because people have spent substantial money getting these cards. Now, others in this banned list, like Nadu Winged Wisdom, the ban was pretty much expected. People knew it was coming, and so there's less upset about it. So let's talk about the legalities here. First of all, there's the issue that they don't really owe you anything about these rules staying the same. There is past precedent for banning cards, and they're allowed to do so. They're allowed to sort of change the rules of the game. And this is particularly true because in this case, the people who are running the Commander rule set are at least a little bit removed from Magic the Gathering. So the initial thought was, no, you've got no claim here. It's just too bad. And that's really the basic position. That's my sort of default position here. So I said I would analyze this to see, like, how could I be wrong? Well, one of the issues is that in designing these cards, and I mentioned this before when I did a video about the One Ring promotion, the people behind Magic the Gathering are clearly aware that some of these cards are worth more or are more sought after. There's sort of chase cards versus others. And so they do know that these things have value. And in some cases, they have heavily promoted these packs of cards to get people to buy them in order to get these chase cards. And as an example, I've got this picture here that I used for my thumbnail. So on the right, you can see a Mana Crypt, one of the banned cards. But on the left, you can see collector boosters, and the collector boosters are more expensive than the regular ones. And featured on the cover is the Jeweled Lotus to say, if you buy this, you could draw a Jeweled Lotus. You could win a Jeweled Lotus, although they wouldn't want to use the win terms, but really, you're paying money for a random chance at cards, and they're featuring the Jeweled Lotus on the front. But not only that, look behind both of those things. They're both sitting on a playmat, and that playmat also shows a picture of a jeweled lotus. That card was featured very heavily, and a lot of people really sought after it. And now its value is basically nothing because you just can't use it for anything. So there might be some argument here, either in equity or as a fraudulent misrepresentation. I think it's a thin argument, but I don't entirely think it's crazy. It's a long shot argument. And the thing is that law is full of long shot arguments. There are plenty of arguments that people thought were stupid right up until they weren't. As an example here, the widely mocked McDonald's hot coffee case. Now, a lot of that is people thought it was stupid because they misunderstood the basis of the lawsuit. But you also have cases like the beef tallow in McDonald's fries. That maybe was a case that a lot of people didn't think had huge legs, but it worked out. So there is some thin possibility, and I think that thin possibility might get a little stronger in certain specific circumstances, because my understanding is that sometimes they had people working at conventions. And these people were volunteers, except that they were promised things in exchange for working at conventions, which in some cases may have included these specific cards. If you were promised that you would get a jeweled lotus for helping work this convention, and then later that jeweled lotus, and especially if they knew that they were going to devalue this card, that becomes a big issue. Now, I previously mentioned that there's some independence with the rules. And we have to put a big asterisk on that, because Commander started out as sort of an independent fan project. People who love Magic the Gathering and said, we've just developed a cool new way to play it. Here's our rule set and so forth. But it took off. And it took off enough that Magic the Gathering has, to a certain extent, or at least the companies behind it, have brought them under their wing and consult with them about things like, hey, we have this new card we're thinking of putting out. Is this going to absolutely ruin Commander play? Because if so, then maybe we want to change it and fix it and not do that. There's a lot of interconnection now between the people who are running Commander and the people behind the base Magic the Gathering game. And so this creates the possibility of some more serious issues. Certainly, if I was trying to draft a lawsuit to litigate this issue, I would be arguing that they knew about these things and that they must have had knowledge shared back and forth, and that sort of removal, not actually as much of a removal as you might think or you might hope. I don't know if ultimately that would pay out. I don't think it's likely to, but it is really interesting. The bigger sort of takeaway from a lot of this is kind of a buyer beware when you are investing, and people do now invest in Magic the Gathering cards. They say, hey, I can use these to, maybe these will go up in value. But they could go down in value, and they could go down in value precipitously based on decisions that you didn't have any part in, right? This is potentially a big problem. The bigger risk for, Wizards of the Coast, Hasbro here, I think, isn't somebody successfully suing them over this ban. I think that there's a thin chance of that. But there's also the bigger chance that somebody gets annoyed enough to push something around the lottery rules. And I mentioned this previously when I covered the one ring card. Magic the Gathering does run afoul, or it seems to be skirting the boundaries. Certainly when I look at Canadian law, I have a hard time explaining to somebody why Magic the Gathering wouldn't be illegal under Canadian law. So you might see somebody who's pissed off enough to bring some sort of lawsuit or to push some sort of enforcement. And you could potentially see a government getting interested when they look at just how much money is behind all of this. Now, that wouldn't actually end up helping a lot of the people who might be inclined to bring this. Because if you're a collector and you're sitting on a bunch of jeweled lotuses because you were collecting them, or a bunch of, dockside extortionist or whichever, you probably don't want to blow up Magic the Gathering as a thing. It would really not benefit you because you have other cards that are worthwhile. Similarly, another sort of group of people who might get burned here are the game stores. I can't see them having any interest in blowing up this as well because there's a lot of money involved in this. And you've got stores that sell nothing except Magic the Gathering. You've got stores that sell almost nothing except Magic the Gathering. And I will take this moment to acknowledge, although not, I didn't receive any paid, anything, but I do really appreciate some assistance from the folks at Star Lotus Games here in Edmonton. I used to play Magic. I did not have a healthy relationship with Magic the Gathering, and I quit playing it somewhere around the Dark set, which means that I haven't played in like 15 years. So I had to go and get up to speed a little bit as to this, but when I saw what was on some of these cards, it was unsurprising to me why they might make a ban list. Nadu Winged Wisdom is an absolutely insane card. It's crazy. I don't understand how that one ever got printed. It just seems so abusable on its face. I haven't played in 15 years, but the instant I saw that card, I was already thinking of like broken combinations with the limited number of cards I know about. And that's without considering all the cards that have come out in the intervening time. So I know that this is probably going to be disappointing to a fair number of people because a lot of people are justifiably feeling wronged here. They're like, listen, I got these cards. Sometimes they were heavily promoted. As mentioned, the Jeweled Lotus really kind of featured in this. And the artist for Jeweled Lotus has come out on Twitter and has opposed the ban. I think that's really interesting that the artist is stepping up to say, this is how the game should be. So I don't know. The biggest risk, I think, to Wizards of the Coast Hasbro here is one of consumer goodwill. And the value of these cards, in large part, depends on consumer goodwill and interest. As a note, I own some copies of a collector card game called Cult. And those are basically worthless because nobody plays Cult. If people start abandoning Magic the Gathering, and I don't think that's likely, but to the extent people do, it can really diminish the value of the cards and could potentially create, there is the distant potential, or at least the foreseeable potential, of a spiral. Because if you end up with the card values start dropping because consumer confidence is shattered, then you might see collectors starting to dump their collections in order to avoid the price plummet, which of course further plummets the price. Yeah, a lot of my friends still play and really enjoy Magic the Gathering, so I hope that doesn't happen. But yeah, I thought I'd talk about this one. Again, my main takeaway is I don't think there's a lawsuit here, but I can see the thin arguments for where I could be wrong, and especially in the narrow case of people who did work that was compensated with these cards in a window where Magic, or the people behind it, Hasbro, Wizards of the Coast, might have known this ban was coming. I don't know if they did, but it's certainly plausible as a theory. Anyway, we'll see. This is one that I've kind of got a pin in. I am kind of watching out because it would not surprise me if somebody launched a suit, somebody who might be sitting on a whole lot of value of cards. Maybe not this time, but maybe they ban something even more valuable in future. We'll see. If that happens, I'll cover it because, hey, nerd plus lawsuit equals my, that's really my thing. So anyway, those are kind of my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Let me know what you're thinking. Yeah, and if I got something wrong, I'm sorry. As I said, I've been out of the game for like 15 years, but it's a really fascinating little occurrence here. So this is frustrating. I recorded a perfectly good video, and now I have to record an addendum to it because the Commander Rules Committee has just resigned, citing harassment that they've been facing from the intersection of people who are upset with this rules change and people who are raised by rabid baboons and think that harassment and death threats are the appropriate way to deal with this, which of course they're not. This is unquestionably a bad decision or a bad thing. I can't say it's a bad decision because I'm not the one facing that sort of harassment, so they got to make their calls. But it'll be a bad thing for the community because as much as I pointed to some of the interconnection that you see between the Rules Committee and Wizards, it is still good to have some distance between those two groups because the Rules Committee unquestionably were trying to change the rules for better play. These cards have issues. There are reasons to ban them. And I don't think that their decisions were unreasonable. They just have consequences for people, especially people who were super keen on playing these cards. But if the decisions on the rules format now go to Wizards of the Coast, well, Wizards of the Coast might not be thinking of what is the most fun, but they might be thinking of what are the best business decisions. Cards like Jeweled Lotus, Wizards might be less inclined to ban simply because they really thought that it was a great seller. So, yeah, this is going to be an interesting change. It won't change the equation for any lawsuits about these cards, but it might change the equation in future. And I guess you could argue that Wizards could always unban them, but yeah, this is going to be an interesting change, and I think this is a really unfortunate development. But what can you do? Yeah. Anyway, I don't think it changes the legal analysis any for this, but if this video would be out of date if I didn't include an addendum or a little discussion of this. So yeah, let me know your thoughts. Till next time.